Hello. Oh, crikey, that's loud. So thanks for coming to my talk. This is a bit terrifying. This is a gigantic room, the biggest room I've ever spoken in, and that's the biggest I've ever seen my slides. I'm Andrew Harmel-Law. I'm a tech principal at ThoughtWorks. I work in the UK. A tech principal means I'm still technical. I don't get to write as much code as I would like to write, but I get to write more code than if I'd kind of taken some management path. And that is kind of that's the basic motivation and the kind of the thing that's underneath lots of the stuff that I'm going to talk about here. Before I talk, this is it's terrifying because this room is massive, but it's kind of cool because the two things after my wife and my kids that I love the most are movies and comics. So to talk in a gigantic cinema screen in Belgium, where like Tintin comes from, which is like one of the greatest comics ever written, is kind of exciting. So I'm going to try and think about that as opposed to thinking about how big the room is. So let's go. So this is good to start our talk with a quote. This is a quote from me, so it's kind of cheating. It's something that I put on Facebook sometime in 2014, so about 5 years ago. And as you can see, obviously something had happened in my career where I was spending less time hacking and shipping code, or writing, crafting and shipping code. And I was spending more time at this point working with teams. And up to that point, I'd spent most of my life actively trying to avoid having to do having anything to do with human beings, unless it was via code reviews or standing in front of a whiteboard with a pen. And so while this was happening, I'd spent some time actually just looking at people and working with people, looking at their emotions and their desires and needs and trying to figure those things out. And it turned out that working with people like that was, as it says here, almost as much fun as hacking code. So that was cool. That's the kind of first thing that made me think on the journey to coming up with this talk. Starting with a quote from me is a bit like cheating, so this is a proper quote from a properly famous person. I can't remember if Eli Goldratt is alive or dead, but he wrote some awesome books, and there's a Twitter account called Goldratt Books, which tweets quotes from Eli Goldratt. So Eli Goldratt wrote most famously The Goal, as you can see in the top left, in gigantic writing, because it's a gigantic screen. He wrote The Goal. The Goal is basically the book that then got rewritten to become a Phoenix project, and now downstairs you can get copies of the new book that's kind of, again, based on a similar thing called the Unicorn Project. But he thought deeply about lots of things, and this is one of the things he thought about. So he said, and this made me really stop and think, features have no value until they are in the hands of a user being used for productive effort. So that's quite a no value. Not like a little bit of value, they're completely useless. And the second part of the quote, so any activity not spent getting the next most valuable feature into the hands of a user quickly is just waste. So that's pretty stark. And for someone who spent possibly 20 years of their adult life, i.e. their entire adult life, working on software and trying to get what we all wanted to be valuable features into the hands of users who were going to use those features to do valuable things, a significant portion of my life had been wasted. So the waste he's talking about here was things that I'd contributed to. Not on purpose. We'd all been, in all the projects that I'd worked on, everybody was trying to get the things which everyone believed were valuable into the hands of customers. But it made me think about loads of stuff. The features we shipped which had never gone in front of customers. The features we'd shipped, which when we looked at the user logs, nobody was actually using. Or like 3 people were actually using. And the things that we'd shipped and then pulled immediately because it turned out that we thought people wanted them, but they didn't want them. So this made me think. So this, I paused for at least 30 seconds when I read this tweet. But then I stopped, wondering about, I thought, was thinking it was my fault. It can't possibly be my fault because I'm a developer and developers are really clever people, right? So it can't be my fault. So it must be someone else's fault. That is a gigantic screen. So someone else must be to blame, right? So who can be to blame? There's lots of people. We work in software development. There's tons of people we can blame. Scrum Masters are an awesome target for blame. Because basically, we know what we're doing. Scrum Masters are just kind of people who are trying to, maintain their career and still stay, They probably have gone post-technical, right? So they used to be developers. They'll talk to you about when they used to write COBOL, but now they're just getting in the way and stopping you speaking when you need to explain things at stand-up, right? That's what Scrum Masters do. QAs massively get in my way. They I write awesome features. They then tell me they're not awesome, and they get me to work on them and fix all the defects. BAs are just failed developers. We all know that. So there's a good, on our day-to-day, daily lives, right? Probably within 3 desks of where we sit, there's a lot of people to blame. Alternatively, if you want someone to blame that will travel with you across industries, if you leave software development and you go to another industry, middle management, you could blame them. It's always middle management's fault. And that, no matter where you work, middle management will probably always exist, and therefore, that's someone you can get used to blaming. But if you really want to level up on the blame, you can blame senior executives, right? Senior executives, they'll occasionally come down once every 6 months. They'll talk to you about a bunch of stuff which seems completely divorced from your day-to-day reality, and they will try and empathize, but it turns out they'll go back to their lovely desk in their lovely nice part of the office, which is very different from the basement where you probably work. And it's probably ultimately their fault. If only they had vision, or if only they had, they knew what was going on, or listened to customers and things. Of course. So there's loads of people to blame. This is actually quite good because we're in a cinema. Blaming people, unless your definition of success is having someone tied to a stake, a nice scapegoat, tied to a stake, ideally with flames licking around their feet, because that's, then you've really succeeded. And if you like waving things like a rake, I'm not sure why they're waving a rake, but waving like a flaming torch or something, if that's your definition of success, blaming people will definitely get you to the right place, right? That's where you want to be. That doesn't feel like, it's not necessarily the right way to do things. On top of this, another picture from clearly I love films, right? So this is another classic picture from films, but this isn't supposed to symbolize Moses. This is symbolizing senior executives and middle management. So developers love to say things are wrong. I've had tons of conversations with tons of developers, including, I've started some of these conversations. We all know it's wrong. We're blaming people. We think we could fix it. Executives and middle management, they know it's wrong too, right? They see tons of expensive developers sitting around not shipping code, or wasting time, or not going fast enough, or creating this thing called technical debt, which they don't really understand, but it seems like an excuse we use to justify why things are going slow. So they try and fix things. And what they do is they come down from the heights of where they are with a change program or an adoption. So you might do an agile adoption, right? We're going to do agile. I've been to a seminar. Agile will solve all of our problems. We're going to do an agile thing. Or we're going to do DevOps transformation. We should definitely do one of those. You're probably all either currently involved in, or about to be involved in, or have previously been involved in a DevOps or agile transformation, because that's how it works. And I'm going to be a bit polemical here, because some of these things do work, but typically, and for the purposes of this presentation, they all fail. All these kind of top-down, big, stop the world, expensive, long-term, intermittent interventions to try and change how things work, the structure of things, and the kind of culture of people and how they do things, doesn't work, right? Because if this was like software, that sounds like the gigantic rewrite in the sky, which everyone talks about, including developers. But when we actually get given the opportunity, because I've been given the opportunity, they go, right, we believe you, you should do a rewrite. And then suddenly you're like, all the blood drains from your face. Because actually doing a rewrite is a terrifying prospect, because everything stops. All the features you almost had, you've now not got because you've wiped everything. So I understand the motivation, but they fail. So time for another quote. There's tons of books to read. There's a reading list at the end of this. There's a photograph, the slide you can take a photograph of. This is a book, a quote from a book by Peter Senge, who wrote The Fifth Discipline, the thickest book. You get like a prize if you read the whole book. It's called The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization. So if people in your human resources, or people team, as we call them at Thoughtworks, but they're still human resources, that's where the word learning organization comes from. That's because he came up with it. And he did, to come up with this, these 5 aspects of a new kind of performant organization. Senge did loads of study. He looked across lots of industries. He applied lots of systems thinking. It's really kind of technical way of looking at things. lots of in-depth studies, lots of kind of long-running stuff, and he came up with a bunch of conclusions. I'm going to pick one because it's useful for this talk. He said, placed in the same system, people tend to produce similar results. So that made me stop and think. And it's true, right? So sometimes if you've been, like most of us are lucky enough to have been in a high-performing team at least once. And you know what it feels like when you're a high-performing team. So you're in this team, you're like people, you're speaking to users, you're like crafting stories, you're writing quality code, QAs are doing a job, you've got a good partnership with QA, who are, working with you, not against you. Then you're shipping them and it's getting into the hands of users, right? And this doesn't need to be these days, this could have happened in the past, just via different methods. That feels good. Then someone, because you're all awesome, someone gets offered a job because they do a talk at a conference like DevOps, they go downstairs and Cloud Bees offer them a job, right? And they take it and you're like, oh, this is a disaster. This person is going to leave. They're the linchpin of our team. They leave, you get someone new, and the whole team keeps going, right? So it turns out that person was awesome, but they were also, they were being enabled and allowed to be awesome because how the team worked and how everything around about them worked allowed them to be awesome. There's a famous quote from Netflix. Somebody said to, I can't remember his name, but the person who runs Netflix, where do you find all these awesome developers? And his reply was, I hired them from you and just let them be good, right? And it's totally true. So this made me think, it's like, yeah, this is, maybe it is, it's not the people, it's the system within which they work. So then that made me think, if things are still broken, and I'm still working in lots of these places where things are broken, how do we fix it? And I came up with a barmy idea. I think we can do a better job. So I don't, as opposed to the people in middle management and the people in the senior executive suite, I think us, the makers, and so I apologize for being rude about BAs and QAs, I think, and even Scrum Masters. I think we are the people who are better placed to kind of figure out what to do and to change things to get to a kind of structure and setup and culture where we can be super efficient and deliver valuable features to customers, next most valuable feature, one after the other. So I'm going to be specific about this. I'm going to say 3 things, and I'm going to tell you some stories that hopefully illustrate what I mean and mechanisms and kind of ways to get to this. Number 1. Rather than big bang, I think organizational structure is best served by being in a constant state of incremental change. So if you don't like change programs, I think that you're not going to like this, but I think you should, because, like with refactoring, big bang refactorings are bad and they make everyone hate themselves. But if you're constantly refactoring, right, TDD, red, green, refactor, if you're constantly tweaking and changing things to look ahead and see, constantly doing small improvements to your code, you could also do small improvements to your culture and to your structure. Number 2, like I said already, the best people to do this are those people closest to the action. So it's us because we're closest to the action. If it was another type of industry, this would still apply, but you would be, I don't know, doing something else. But we're closest, we're building the things which are giving the value to our customers, right? But this is the key bit, and there's going to be a little emoji theme through this. I think the reason we're best placed to do this in software is because the skills we use to build and design and test software are the same skills which will use us to build and design and test organizations and cultures. So with that in mind, we'll get to the main bit of the talk. So there's 5 things I'm going to talk about. There's tons of stuff I could have talked about. I read a lot of books. Like I had a really bad commute, which was like 4 hours a day, 2 hours into London and 2 hours out, which is how far you need to live outside of London if you want to live in like the real world, in a beautiful part of the country, but it's a long way. So I picked 5 things because A, I could come up with cool names, which hopefully look good on a slide, but also are memorable. But B, I thought they were kind of actionable. So what I want to do is you to come away from this talk thinking, oh, I could try this stuff. So each of these things you could try. There's some examples in here. You can try these things a little bit. Like, nobody would advocate doing a big lot of something, but just a little bit, little experiment. Oh, that's quite good. That works. And let's figure out how to do it. So the last thing I need to make clear, I'm going to explain these using stories, because that's the best. Ever you go to presentation school and everyone tells you the best way to explain things is to use a story, which is true. It's a flipping nightmare coming up with stories. I'm going to tell you stories. They're all 99.95% true. I've kind of changed the names to protect the innocent, but everything else is true. But the key important thing, and this is what you need to bear in mind, typically in the stories you'll hear, because loads of people at this conference are awesome presenters, they will tell you stories, and you will relate to the story because you will be the protagonist as well. The person doing the talking will be the protagonist. You can put yourself in their shoes. I don't want you to put yourself in my shoes. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the kind of customer of the story, which will be someone who's a developer or someone who's part of a team. But I don't want you to kind of put yourself in my shoes, even if you are in a position which I will kind of talk about. So you need to kind of think of yourself as the customer or the consumer or the person at the end of at the end of it, because it should help you kind of change your relationship to the story and hopefully make it kind of sit with you in a different way. So with that in mind, we'll go to number 1, maps the human architecture. So I'm a consultant. I've been a consultant before ThoughtWorks. I was a consultant for a famous French consulting company, where all these stories come from. You can look it up on LinkedIn. And they were a good company, they were an awesome place to work. But what would happen is we get sent to clients, and job number 1, something would be in trouble, or someone thought something was in trouble, and we would have to get our heads around what was going on. And most of the time, you'd have to look at a gigantic code base, because they're never small. A gigantic code base, and you need to figure out what that code base was doing. So you check out the code, you'd eventually get access to the code. You check out the code, and you wouldn't go to the first package alphabetically in the alphabet and then open the first class and start reading the import statements and the package statement at the top. You would try and figure out where, just by looking at things in the structure and based on your understanding of how software is commonly laid out, you would get a vague feel to map out how things work. That's the skill you need to bear in mind for this. So, once upon a time, I was a happy software developer, and I already mentioned my wife and kids. I was happily married. My wife was quite happy because I travelled away from home, so she didn't have me getting under her feet all the time. But then we had some kids. So I thought it would be a responsible thing to do as an adult to get promoted so that I can earn more money, so I can provide better for my wife and my children. And because I'm a cis, white, heterosexual male, getting promoted was easier than I thought. So I kind of got promoted a bit faster than I'd intended to, and which was good for me. And so then that was good. So then I got promoted. My boss phoned me up and went, "Congratulations, you've been promoted. Unfortunately, we had to give you more responsibility to justify the fact you've been promoted," which nobody had mentioned prior to me. I'd previously been promoted, and I just got more money. They went, "You've got to look after that team you used to be a part of. You're now the manager of that team." Right? I'd spent a lot of my life trying to avoid being a manager of a team. So I'm now the manager of this team. So he said, "It's all right. We've got a 3-hour meeting because I've just left. I've handed my notes in and going to go to ThoughtWorks. So you can read into the fact that I work at ThoughtWorks now, whatever you want." But he said, "I'm going to ThoughtWorks. I've got 3 hours to tell you what it's like to run this team." And so he had this is a real photograph. He had the mind map of what he needed to tell me. And then over the space of 3 hours, I wrote all this stuff with like loads of, I'm going to try and use my laser pointer. There's things with like exclamation marks. Don't take on small groups. Because he was like, "I learned this. Don't ever take on small groups. They'll take all your time. It'll be a nightmare." So all of this stuff is me panicking. I had no idea. Because I still had a day job. I still had to be a consultant. So I'm now, after this 3-hour meeting, I'm on the train station in the dark and it's raining because it's in Britain. And I phone my wife and say, "I am in serious trouble. I have just got promoted and given this much more responsibility on top of my day job. I am not going to do this. This is going to be a failure. I'm going to get in everyone's way. I'm going to make bad decisions. I have no idea what I'm doing." And she said, "What you need to do is kind of figure out how all of this information fits together. You do this all the time. You go into customers all the time and you kind of go, right, how does this stuff fit together to make some way of looking at it so that you can at least understand, and then you can pick your targets for what you're going to do." And that's right. That's what I would have done. So if it's software, I would have drawn a big picture with boxes and lines. Right? You can't do that for human beings because that's not really how humans work. You could draw an organogram, right? Like a hierarchical org chart, we call them in Britain. But that wouldn't work because it was like I was the new boss. So it would have been a box with me and then a box with 35 boxes with other people who used to be my colleagues. still were my colleagues, underneath me. That wouldn't help me. But there was a thing, another book I'd read, and I think in the room next door somebody's talking about it, so you should watch the video of this one, because it's about sociocracy. Holacracy has a new way of representing things. So Holacracy has tons of stuff, some of which feels like Scrum gone completely out of control, but other stuff which is awesome. Circle and roles is awesome. So instead of saying, this is a person, this is their job title, it says, these are the roles that people are performing in this organization. And then you organize them in a kind of hierarchical, or not hierarchical, kind of like a flat structure, but like different roles belong to different circles, and some circles belong to other circles. So it's a bit like cells belong to organs, organs belong to subsystems of the body, and subsystems of the body combine to make a whole body. So what's a role? A role has and so I can have multiple roles as well. I can play multiple roles. So I could be the manager, I could be a software consultant, architect, I could be like the person responsible for 3 other things. A role has a purpose, a set of accountabilities, things you can rely on for that role to do, and some domains, things they own. So a good example is, if I'm a developer, my purpose is to ship quality code and get it in front of customers, quality valuable code. The accountabilities might be keep the code base clean, keep the build green, and if it's build and run, then it's support broken defects in production. And the domain might be the code base itself, the running software for doing build and run, the Jenkins servers if you've got a proper setup and you can control your own builds as opposed to asking another team to add a build. And then a circle just might group a load of those things together. So I took this, and I figured out how to map it into roles. So to begin with, I just drew a big circle and put it all in the thing, and then I was the role which had all of these things, and everyone else was in the circle. But then I broke it down, and it looks like this. So it's still terrifying, but at least I had an idea of how things looked. So I realized I had to do some sales work. What a disaster. I had to do marketing, which was even worse. Gig management was cool. That's me like making sure that I get the right people on the right projects because they want to or because they need to grow their skills. Career guides. Turns out I loved this bit. It was like making people better and kind of helping them grow their careers. Training approvals. We'll come back to that. It's training down there. Where's this thing gone? Training. Tooling, recruitment. Loads of stuff. And within marketing, so it turns out there was bits within marketing. So these are the circles, not the roles. So I mapped it all out. That was cool. Felt really good. So that's the end of this section. Easy, definitely do it. So number 1, tips. Don't underestimate your existing understanding of how an organization works. I had no appreciation of how complicated my boss's job was. I just thought sometimes he was really hard to get a hold of. That's because he was like doing all of this stuff. Number 2, we'll come back to this. It's a map of existing power and influence. Because he had all this power, right? He was responsible for this stuff, which means he's got the power to do things with this stuff. What I did was, step 1, because I wanted to have a good excuse when people didn't get feedback from me quickly on something, I made this open to say if I'm not replying, it's probably because I'm busy doing one of these other 30 things or my day job. So I published it, but it was good, so they knew, they could see, oh, okay, Andrew has responsibility for this, he doesn't have responsibility for that. I now know you don't need to be in charge. I could have asked my boss before he left to find this stuff out, but I never did. But you could be. By doing it, you learn stacks. I understood both how our team worked, but understood how the team kind of contracted bits of what we could provide to the wider organization. And, we'll come back to this, what you can see you can change. You wouldn't just like randomly go into a code base and start changing stuff. You'd want a bigger picture, right? So that's number 1. Number 2. If you just looked at static code and you never saw it running, that would be probably a not great thing to do. Because like how many times have we written code and we think it's awesome and then we put it into a soak test environment or, classically, in the last 2 weeks of the project, we put some load on it and everything breaks. You want to see the system running, right, to find out where you should invest your time and effort. So that's what this story is. So just like we had a static view, we're now going to have a dynamic view. So if we go back here, I mentioned training. Training in the 3-hour handover was you need to approve training. Done. So in my head, I'm the cop. Email comes to me, I say yes or no, email goes to the next person in the approval chain, done. Right? That's a minor feeling of power, right? That's vaguely exciting. It's more like this. Thousands of emails, because we hired more people. So I was quite good at hiring people. I ended up with 98 people directly reporting to me before I left. which was fun. So that's not why I left. Working with 98 awesome people is cool. Lots of emails, right? Also, and you can tell when people have been promoted because they'll have lots of chat windows flashing in the bottom of their, the bar, whatever their kind of taskbar is. Loads of people not sending an email, messaging you saying, can I go on a course? Or they'll keep catching the hallway, can I go on a course? Loads of emails, all of which will be written in various levels of detail. So some of these emails will have loads of detail, like I've done tons of research, here's a business case, here's everything. Some will go, can I go on spring training? Right, not enough. So I would be like, oh, and so I had a day job, so I'd do all I could to kind of not think about this. I had a separate mailbox. Things like, when things have gone wrong, when your boss opens up their Outlook and they've got a lot of mailboxes. Separate mailbox, I could put them in the separate mailbox, and then once a week I could look at them. Once a week, some of them had already expired, because by the time I got down to the training request, the training course had already happened, right? So then they're pissed off. Or, it's a bad request, I have to email them back and say, can you give me more information? And it goes back and forth. So this was a nightmare. So I felt bad. But here's the thinking emoji. What could I do, right? Think like a developer. And dangerously, I've been reading more books, again, which you'll see at the end. I thought there's a really simple way to do this. I could automatically approve all training requests. Like really thinking like a developer, I could write like an Outlook rule, which I wouldn't even have to see them, right? If I said, can you put this tag in your email? I will spot that tag, automatically forward the mail on with the word I approve, send it straight to the next part of the chain. Done. And, this is true, for a month, my life was amazing. Everything just got approved. Oh, so I'm not completely naive. I did say to everyone, these are the criteria, because I got given a list of criteria that is, I should be kind of applying to an approval request. I said, I trust you. You need to submit training requests by email with this information. I'm trusting you to do it. I'm getting out of the way. This is a trust-based organization. Do it. We're now not going to talk about tips, because you shouldn't do this. We're moving straight on to make the right change. Because I actually did do this. I learned a stack by doing this wrong. This is what actually happened. So, number one, we're now looking slightly more at the whole end-to-end process. It was a lady in the next step down the line. This is finance. She wasn't this old, but that's quite a cool emoji. She's in finance, right? So now she's getting all these auto-approved requests coming through for some things which are good, spring training, some things which sound insane but are still good. Someone wanted to go on a blockchain conference on a cruise ship around the Caribbean. Some things were for barmy stuff. She's in finance. She doesn't know if spring is a real thing or not, right? She doesn't care about any of this stuff. She did learn quite a lot about what was real and what wasn't. Her natural inclination is to not approve a training request to go on a cruise ship. So I'd basically outsourced all of my stuff to her, because people were producing, or were emailing in, and they were producing better requests, but they didn't know, right? So she then has to come back to me. So I'm now getting feedback. I'm getting questions from the lady in finance going, what on earth is going on? So it's still taking a long time. Also, I'm now getting people going, that training request I submitted, it hasn't emerged out of the other end of the system. What's happening? So now instead of less email, I'm getting more email. This was bad. So now I become confused. But I think a second time, because the point is you don't get this right first time, think like a developer. And so what became clear was there were two, and I kind of figured this out already, but I just kind of avoided deeply thinking about it. There were two types of requests. There was, I've just joined, can I go in spring training / Java EE certification / whatever, right? The standard stuff, whatever the thing is, standard thing at the time is. And the other type were, I'd like to go on a cruise ship. Different types of request. So we had a two-stream model. Top ones, for these list of things, just send them straight through. Because it was a small list of things, lady in finance knows that spring is a thing, right? So she doesn't understand why it's called spring, but she understands that this is a thing and that they should go on that. DDD training, doesn't know what it is, but it sounds like she sees a lot of it, so she should approve people. Other ones, they come to me first, because they're tagged, non-standard. We then get into a little loop, so I help the person write an awesome story, or say no, right? So if they want to go on some courses, which aren't any good, then you don't get to do it. Then I've provided the extra information, so then when it comes from me and it looks like a human being's written it, not a Outlook rule, then she can speak to me, but there's a lot less. So this works a lot better. Tips. Number one, see the power of the right change. It's very easy. When you have lots of power, you know, if you're imagining you're in this position, of a small change. I did very little and everything broke. Lots of things can change if you do something. But you need to do the right thing. Changing the wrong thing can have spectacularly bad side effects. And the big thing is, and this I learned, the painful thing is it's painfully obvious from software. You don't just make a change and then deploy it to prod and go, it's awesome because it started. You wait for like 24 hours to see if it backs up everywhere or dead letter queues fill up. But I didn't think about that. So what you need to do is observe the whole dynamic system, end to end, and not localize for, optimize for a local optima. The goal of the system was to get you, the new person who's joined my team, or the person who's got a new training budget, on that course and soaking up the info so you're a better developer. It was not to make me have more fun doing more software delivery. So I'd optimized the wrong thing. Other things, maintain quality. This comes in from like lean, but it's totally true. Maintaining the quality at the step of the process when you can maintain it is super important. And watch out for feedback. If people are if the feedback loops are kicking in, then you are definitely in trouble. Number 4, kill consensus. It's my favorite. Consensus is, the word consensus means 2 very different things, and this was striking to me. There's no story here because you don't need a story. We all have the pain that I'm going to talk about on a daily basis. And that pain is meetings. So in consensus, you need consensus at some point in the real world and also in software. In software, we will jump through hoops of fire to avoid architecting a system which needs any more than the bare minimum amount of consensus, because if you have loads of consensus required, your system goes slow. But in the real world, we love consensus, right? We have meetings going. I'm sure half of you, since you've been in this conference, despite the fact you're out of offices on, have been on conference calls because someone needed you desperately in a meeting to either get your input or get your approval, right? I've been on lots of them. So what's going on? So this is a picture I found just to prove that meetings are bad. Because I'm a consultant, I've been in pre-meeting meetings. This is actually true. We've got a stakeholder who's got a meeting with their key stakeholder. So they'll have a pre-meeting with me, the consultant, to check they know what I'm going to say. Before I have the meeting with my stakeholder, I'll have a pre-meeting with someone back at base to approve the fact that I'm going to say this thing, and they'll be fine, and then that'll be... These things actually exist. And it's an absolute nightmare. But if we did this all the time. If we did this, this is... I found this on the internet. This is the diagram, which looks deceptively simple. This is a Kafka cluster electing a new leader after something terrible has happened. And just to make it even more terrifying, Zookeeper is in the mix as well. So these things are good software, right? They're not bad software, but if I have to architect my system so that it can, withstand this stuff any more than is a very small amount, then I'm just going to be scared. I don't want to have to go near this. When this stuff breaks, I don't want to go near it. But so why do we have meetings? I think we have meetings because we have no conception of any other way of getting to an agreement apart from getting everybody in a flipping room. And so that's all we do. In Western worlds, maybe in other parts, other cultures, meetings are frowned upon. Across everywhere I've worked, in many different companies, in many different cultures and countries, we just have meetings. There's an alternative. It's called the advice process. So the advice process has 3 rules. Anyone can make any decision, which is awesome. You could stop there, but that sounds like chaos. So there's 2 more. And it means anyone can make, if I need to make a decision, I'm going to make a decision. But you need to seek advice from everyone who will be meaningfully affected, right? So you need to properly think about this decision. You can't just arbitrarily just start, download some bonkers new language from the internet and decide to start writing your new plugin in it. You need to speak to all the people who've been meaningfully affected and those with expertise. So maybe there's someone in an old team who is no longer going to be affected, but they did this 3 years ago and they learned a lot of lessons. You need to speak to them. And that's it. That's the advice process. If you Google the advice process, I think the top result comes from the Reinventing Organizations wiki. They've got examples of this. They use this. There's a Pakistani company that uses similar things like this and other techniques to run nuclear power stations. Right? So that's more risky than software development. Tips. Nobody believes this is going to work. So you start with ADRs, because ADRs are architectural decision records. You need to do these processes and you need to write them down. So when we've done ADRs, anyone can decide you need to make an architectural decision, but we agree with all of the key senior people that we're going to write it down. You record, whether you agree with or not, all of the feedback you get from all the different people. Consequently, you get better decisions. You get better decisions because it's now my decision, right? If I'm taking responsibility to make this decision, it's me that's making it. I can't blame the committee of 17 people on the conference call when we couldn't really hear what half of us were saying. It's me. I do it. And you get it because you see better ownership, speed, and transparency. We don't have to wait 3 months before we can get everybody in a room to decide. We can, speak to the individual people one at a time, and then we share the ADR, and we can, everyone can see what's happening, and you say, right, within this time box, I'm going to do it. So that's it. You should definitely do it. And transparency, because they're written down. Number 4, beyond delegation. You might have been sitting here wondering, everything feels a bit like a refactoring and not a cultural hack. That's true. Beyond delegation is going to revisit the 3 kind of topics, or the 4, but 2 of them are crushed together, and view them in a different light to really put some rocket fuel underneath all of these different techniques. And to do that, you need to go beyond delegation. So to do this, I needed to do some more Googling and find a quote. Turns out I thought Googling for quotes for definitions was easy. The definition of culture is really hard to find. Oh, well, it's not. You Google it and you get a bad definition. Eventually, in the Toyota Way, awesome book, read it, not just for lean people, Edgar Schein was quoted in the Toyota Way. What he says culture is. Culture is the pattern of basic assumptions a given group has to cope with its problems. Which, when you think about it, that's like an awesome definition of culture. So it means if organisation and structure and bureaucracy are the blocks, the physical things that feel hard to change. I shouldn't have said that. Like the physical things that you can see that appear hard to change. The culture is the kind of the mortar, the bits that fills the gaps. And specifically, if you buy an old house like I've bought, there'll be the bricks, there'll be big gaps, and there'll be a lot of mortar filling what should really be a hole filled by some organisational structure or something. But people have just filled it with stuff. And you can see this wherever you go. There's loads of different, so culture might be things like a sense of humour. So sometimes you get like a culture of ownership and transparency and, getting things done. Other times you get a culture of, humour, self-deprecation, seeing the worst, predicting the worst, not really committing, because that's how you cope, right? As an individual in a certain organisation, you're never going to ship good code, so you just, make fun of it, and that's how you survive. And for this, so, at the start, you remember I had the 3 things. Number 2 was the best people to do the changes are us down at the ground. But there's a problem with that, because if I'm not someone doing actual delivery of software, what happens to my job? And if we're talking about going beyond delegation, what happens? So this is the kind of correlate to 2. So 2 becomes 2A, and 2B now becomes the best way to help us do this doing and do these kind of transformational steps is to make as transparent as many processes as possible and open up as many data sources as possible, and then trust and nurture and mentor, but I didn't want to put that on the slide, the people doing the doing to do this stuff. There's a really interesting paper, which I found after I wrote these slides. Google tried to do away with managers, but they couldn't. But it turned out that there were things that managers in the traditional role were getting in the way, but there was a role of nurturing, mentoring, building people's careers, all this kind of stuff. So I recommend you Google it, because it's really good. There is a very definite role for people who aren't necessarily doing the doing, but it's a different type of role. And so this is the thing, it's about power. There is an assumption, and I used to assume this, that people in power, people up the hierarchy, had got there because A, they were Machiavellian, they loved climbing over the bodies of their colleagues, they would do anything to backstab people and get into power. I think in certain industries that's true. I definitely wouldn't ever work in some of those industries, but the vast majority of industries, because I ended up accidentally as one of these people, they're people who just got there because they had kids or something, and they wanted, they wanted a little bit extra money to get, so they thought they'd get promoted. And most of the people in those positions are just doing the best thing they can do to make the best decisions, to get the best for their company and for their people, to just make stuff better. So, and this is the thing, if you show this to your manager, because there's a potential audience of people showing this to their bosses when they get back, there is role still for the boss, it is, but it's a different kind of relationship. It changes around the relationship. But there is, and this is the thing, currently, and it's totally true, the bosses do hold the power. Just the point is, very few of them are very comfortable with that power. The vast majority would happily, but safely, distribute that power. And this is how you do it. The wrong way to do it is delegation. So when I got given a vast amount of things to do, I said to my manager, my new manager, who used to be my boss's boss, this is insane, I can't possibly do this. And they were like, it's cool, just delegate. If you go to some conferences, because you'll then panic and you'll read loads of management books, some of which are interesting, most of which are terrible, they'll all tell you to do delegation, right? So they're like, yeah, just give your problem. You know that problem that you hate? Why don't you give it to someone? And they don't say it, but they secretly recommend, if there's someone you hate, then give that job to the person you hate, right? So when I've done this talk before, I can see someone I know in the audience, so I could make a joke about giving them the training approvals. So I could. So training approvals turns out to be a nightmare. If I don't like someone, I can say, you do the training approvals, here are the rules. I might be kind and give them more than a 30-second description of what it means. But I haven't solved the problem. If you are the person who wants training approved, you've still got this problem where someone who's got a day job is also supposed to approve training requests, and they still have to do this thing, right? They've got no means to change things. All they've got is the means to receive emails, say this is approved or this isn't approved. They've still got all of the same problems. That's delegation. Delegation sucks. Don't do delegation. Devolution, and I'm from Scotland, so I've got strong opinions on this, but devolution is a far better way to do this. And so what devolution is kind of the way that we're going to look at all of these things. So how do you use the advice process to start the process of devolution? So it's a truism that power will initially be held by managers/leaders, right? So if you are one of those people, that's cool. You can start doing this yourself. If not, then you should probably try and show them this presentation and see if they want to do these things. But to move to the advice process, you can't just suddenly, well, unless you're crazy, you can't go, right, we're doing the advice process, I completely step back from all responsibility, everyone just do the right thing. That won't work. So you need role models. So the first thing you can do as a boss is you can start doing the advice process. So instead of making well-considered, timely decisions, but which are opaque, you know, they're not visible, you can start visibly following the advice process and tell people you're following the advice process. Or you can say to your manager, I think we should do this, I'd love to shadow you on this thing and see how it works. It's a safe way to transfer power, especially if you use ADRs. They don't even need to be ADRs, they can just be decision records, because then people can see, why did that thing happen? Okay, this was why, these were the criteria, these were the people we spoke to, this is the feedback we got, we still took this decision because... And it's a gateway drug. So I don't know if gateway drug translates to the continent, but in Britain it's like when you give someone a soft drug and next thing they know they're addicted to heroin, but this is like good heroin. Next, this is the two that are grouped together. Write changes in end-to-end dynamic systems. The first thing you need to do is make the whole system visible to all. So when I started learning about systems, it seemed blindingly obvious, although I hadn't noticed it before then, so it wasn't that blindingly obvious. Because I did a biology degree, which also had a bit of psychology in it. So the whole, like, biological systems are all over the place, right? Now you're hearing a lot more about systems because of global warming, you know, capitalism destroying the world, all that kind of stuff. But what people aren't used to seeing these things. So the first thing is you need to kind of make those systems visible to people. But not just you. If you're the only person who can read systems, then that's another bottleneck. You need to teach people to read systems. There are some books you can read in a minute. If you combine this with the advice process, then you can move towards Kaizen. So Kaizen is not like this lean buzzword which people, it seems to have been interpreted in most of my experience to like someone at senior management level making a small change. True Kaizen in the Toyota production system is the empowerment via the and-on cord of me who like sticks widget A into widget B. I think that if I move that desk three meters closer, you know, reconfigure my workstation, I can massively improve things. So it's down at the ground level. That's what this stuff does. Because you can see the whole system. If I improve my bit but make someone else, you know, if I move the table closer to me, but it's further away from my colleague, I haven't improved the overall system, I've just improved my bit. And the last thing, circles and roles. So the first thing you do is, when you create the circles and roles, you invite co-owners. So when you go on holiday, for example, you don't say, I'm on leave, this person is who you should speak to. You should say, for this, and you don't even need to call it a circle or role, but for this thing, training approval, speak to this person. For this thing, speak to this person. For this thing, speak to this person. So you're slowly removing the association of you with that role. It's just a role which you happen to play. Then you can invite new owners. So the thing I showed before, I was convinced nobody would ever want to take on relationship with sales. 3 people in my team came to me and said, we would love to take that responsibility off you, because they wanted to speak to customers more earlier, Tell them about the cool things we could do, as opposed to the fact that, like, the salespeople thought we could do Java EE and COBOL. And we were like, we can do like Kotlin and stuff, right? But don't let them speak. They'll win bad work. We could win better work. You know, more custom software stuff, not gluing, you know, 3 ERP systems together. They wanted to do this. And you encourage them to make changes via the, you know, advised process or whatever, you know, helping them read the system. So they need to look at the whole picture. And then the last thing is you can let hierarchy emerge. So you can kind of, you know, sink down and become like this glue between teams, nurturing and growing the culture. And then there will still be hierarchy, but it'll be a little team of, like, if there's 3 people working on this, helping salespeople in my thing, then one of them's probably the first point of contact, so salespeople know to speak to that person. So that brings, because we're nearly at the end. Are these things refactorings or hacks? I'm not entirely sure. It's a cool title for a talk. Nothing ever turns out to be as clean cut as you think it is when it gets into the detail. I think it depends how you look at things. I think the safer way to present these things is refactorings, because the word refactoring is associated with our senior peers as something safe, whereas hack sounds a little bit dangerous, like we're going to, you know, have loads of donuts on a Friday and see no measurable improvement. But they go together, and you can look at them from 2 different angles, and they just like in a kind of positive reinforcing loop in a system. So when positive feedback comes and you get more autonomy, and therefore that breeds more autonomy, that's good. That's what you want. So we're nearly at the end. This is the reading list. Number 1, map the human architecture, read Holacracy. The title's wrong. It doesn't abolish hierarchy. It makes it dynamic. There's tons of stuff which, like I said, feels a bit like spring going over the top, because there's a lot of meetings. But it's really good. There's tons of stuff you can steal. Number 2, you need to read these books in order. Not necessarily that order, but you can read them. Number 1, read Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. It's bonkers and blew my mind. So she starts with dripping taps and thermostats, and she gets onto the reason why Western civilization is collapsing under the weight of capitalism and global warming. So you'll become a better human being by reading this, and you'll also know how to improve your software delivery lifecycle. Then you read The Goal. So everyone's read The Phoenix Project. Read The Goal. It's better written, and it's like cool. Fifth Discipline. There's about twice as many words in the Fifth Discipline, in my opinion, than there needs to be, but you can skim read bits of it because he makes the same point 17 times. But it's awesome stuff, and it ties lots of this stuff together. And then if you want an example of how all of this works, read The Toyota Way, which sounds like a boring lean handbook, but there's tons in there about culture. There's this bit which everyone drops off all the slides where people are in the center of this kind of view that they drew of things. And there's tons of stuff about culture and tons of stuff about how they trusted people when they're designing the Lexus and stuff, which is blew my mind. Kill Consensus, read Reinventing Organizations, which will also blow your mind. It's inspired by the next stage of human consciousness. So some of these books are a little bit, you need to like kind of grit your teeth at the start, because it could be written by someone who like does a lot of yoga. My wife does a lot of yoga, so that's not a bad thing, but something like, especially if you're an IT person, you're like, this feels weird. And then the last one, Beyond Delegation, there is a serious lack of books where people tell you what happened when they did these things. Turn the Ship Around is where someone went in and was promoted in the Navy. There's a theme here. They got promoted in the Navy, and they got given responsibility for the worst performing nuclear submarine in the Pacific Fleet of North America, or like the US Pacific Fleet. And so within the hierarchical structure of the US military, and on a nuclear submarine, this L. David Marquet implemented tons of this stuff. He doesn't say he's doing this stuff because he's kind of come at it from his own angle, just by kind of first principles. It'll blow your mind. It's amazing. So I lied at the start. This is my last slide. If I posted, I didn't lie. I did say what I said on Facebook. Now, if I hadn't deleted my Facebook account, because privacy is good, it's as much fun. Doing this stuff is like awesome. So, because you kind of get like, by proxy, because if you've hopefully got out of the way enough and just enabled people, you can get dopamine hits every time anyone merges to master and anyone deploys stuff into production, not just yourself. And that's cool, right? Who, like, dopamine is good until you become addicted to gambling. And that's it. I've got 1 minute left. Does anyone... so I'm going to stick around. If anyone has any questions, I'm still here for the rest of the day. I've got 1 minute left if anyone has any questions. But I'll stay down the front for a little bit. I'll be outside. If you want to, my incredibly memorable Twitter handle. So it's AL94781, because I should have chose a better font. I used to work for Sun Microsystems. If you want to hear about that, I can bore you for years. That was my login handle at Sun Microsystems. Has anybody got any questions? Or stunned silence? Yeah, go.
So, I have no managerial power. I just type.
Yeah.
What could I do to make my organization more efficient?
So I think the big thing that I've started doing now, the main one is looking at mapping out the system. So we at Thoughters do this all the time, but I didn't realize why we were doing it when I first started. Showing that there's a bigger picture and that something's being optimized. You know, this one piece is being optimized, but at the expense of this next piece down the line, or that, you know, we're deferring responsibility to someone else. Like, we're writing code, but it's being tested later on. If you make the overall life cycle more visible, then people are like, okay, right, cool. And then hopefully they'll ask you, what do you think you should do to change it? And then you can get into the thing, you'd be like, I'd like to do this, but I know you won't trust me, so I could use ADRs. Or I could take responsibility from this from you, but it belongs to you, so could we define clearly what it is and stuff? And you've got to go slowly, because people are terrified, but it works. Time's up, unfortunately. So yeah, come and find me. I'll be hanging around outside. Thank you.